Well, joining me now from Baghdad is retired Brigadier General Mark Kimmitt. He's a former spokesman for the U.S. military. And with me here in the studio, we have Dima Moussa. She's a member of the opposition Syrian National Coalition. And Selim Atalay. He's a journalist and commentator for the Turkish broadcaster 24 TV. Thank you all for joining us. Let me start with you, Selim. It was a bad weekend on a particular day for Turkish soldiers, deadliest day over the weekend.
Unfortunately.
Did you expect this cost when Operation Olive Branch was announced?
Yes and no. Of course, not one single loss is desired and wanted. But what's going to happen is a part of an overall security operation that has been going on in other parts of the country, southeast Turkey and other side of the border. So yes, unfortunately, casualties take place. But in the end, security and assuring the border security matters more. So. And Turkish support, Turkish national support is wholly behind this operation. So,
yeah, talking about being behind the operation, Dima, Syrian opposition generally behind it. Tell me why.
Well, obviously, we have our issues with the YPG groups, which are backed by the PKK. We consider any radical groups a threat to Syrians and Syrian security.
Mm-hmm. And General Kimmitt, let me bring you in here. When this was launched on January 20th, there were lots of questions about the operation, lots of questions about the fault lines between the U.S. and Turkey. You know, the U.S. backing the other side, the side that Turkey wants to pummel in this. Given where we are right now, is this how you expected things to turn out in the state of play?
Well, again, first of all, let me offer my condolences to those families in Turkey who've lost their loved ones. It's never a good day. It is always a sad day when families lose soldiers in combat. Surprisingly, I thought that this operation would move much quicker. I'm sad to see that this has slowed down. I think it's indicative of how the YPG wants to fight this fight. And if they continue to fight in this manner, I would expect this operation to go a little bit longer than we had hoped.
Yeah, it's interesting that they are putting up some stubborn resistance, and it brings me to ask you, given that the United States supports them, what do you make of the YPG's tactics? Now, I know it doesn't technically support them in the fight against Turkey, but it supports them when they fight Daesh, and by default then, you know, people make the connection. When we look at the tactics, suicide bombings, firing rockets into Turkey, is there a conundrum here for the United States?
Well, first of all, let's talk about the tactics that are being used. I was surprised, would have expected to see the forces hunker down in the cities because those forces have the advantage inside the cities. They take away all of the advantages that the attacker has. The attacker can't use his jet aircraft, can't use his heavy artillery, and so he must, as we've seen inside of Iraq, in Mosul, Ramadi, in other tough battles, that all those advantages come down and are eliminated and come down to fighting man-to-man, street-to-street, block-to-block.
Is there a conundrum, General Kimmitt, for the United States, given the tactics used by the YPGs and that they're allies, albeit in another fight, but they're allies and they're using all the tactics of a terror group?
Well, I think what we're seeing is this is a relatively slow battle on the part of the YPG as well. They aren't getting the support of the United States. They aren't getting the artillery. They aren't getting the aircraft. And so I would expect over time that the superior forces inside of Turkey will overwhelm them. As for the U.S. political considerations on this, again, we have asked that this operation be short, try to avoid civilian casualties at all costs, and hopefully we can get those security issues reestablished along the border so there's no need to fight.
Mm-hmm. Selim Atalay, does it sound reasonable to you?
It's interesting that the general is recalling the old memories of the Iraqi invasion. No, there won't be a Fallujah here. If the operation is slow, because Turkey is paying utmost attention to the civilian casualties, where is Afrin? 30 kilometers from the border? Mm-hmm. How long does it take for an armored column to reach 30 kilometers from the border? It's a matter of hours. In that sense, it's not much difficult to reach to that target, but again, civilian casualties, civilian centers, and I don't agree that Turkey needs to, Turkish forces or Turkish-supported fighters need to fight street battles in the cities. there's something called isolating the cities, surrendering them and surrounding them and isolating them and moving on. So that might be tried.
Well, I mean, Selim, Turkey says almost 1,000 terrorists have been killed,
exactly.
according to the president.
That too.
That suggests that there are a lot of fighters, right? Might it be more difficult than Turkey had imagined, given that the YPG are a tough bunch?
Don't think so. We have been following, as Turkey and observers and everyone, media have been following what's going on in Afrin for 2 years. They had ample time to beef up their defenses, bring out their weapons and whatever defenses. We have seen concrete bunkers on the mountains, so they had ample time to dig up and do concrete bunkers in there. So our unofficial estimates range from 3 to 6 months to end this whole operation.
That's really interesting, because I mean, we got the sense from President Erdogan that it might be done soon, but
if it goes faster, then there will be the casualties on the other side would reach to 4 digits. Then yes.
Dima, why is the FSA the right group for Turkey to partner with here?
Well, I mean, they have partnered before in the Euphrates Shield area, and there's an interest, and there's a vested interest, obviously, for Syrians also to fight the radicals, as I mentioned earlier. You don't want to view Turkey as an invader, so it is to its interest to depend on its local partners on the ground. And also, you know, Syrians will, they will make sure, I think, even more so than Turkey, which I know it's interested in ensuring that civilian casualties are limited or not have any casualties at all.
All right, but then there's war plans and there's war reality. And it's interesting because we're not quite sure where it's going right now. There are suggestions, General Kimmitt, that Turkey's going to go on to Manbij after that and on, and even as far as Iraq afterwards. Would that be the right thing to do or a mistake in your opinion?
Well, I think it'll be surprising if that in fact happens. Again, this is a slow operation. I would expect it to go on for quite some time, as your other guest said. It may well be that the determination is made by the government of Turkey that sufficient terrorists have been neutralized, to use the term that the government uses, so that they no longer present a threat. I think it would be unfortunate if the Turkish forces then did start heading east after taking Afrin city and start towards Manbij. I know that our two militaries are talking extensively, because that's the last thing I think either of the NATO allies want to see, that we would actually start having two NATO allies potentially in conflict with each other. So no, I don't expect to see the Turkish forces go all the way to the border of Iraq.
And is there any likelihood, General Kimmitt, that these two NATO allies will end up clashing on the battlefield, whether by mistake or design?
Well, I think if it does happen, it would be more by mistake than design. That would be the last thing that anybody would want to see. NATO has had both partners inside the alliance for over 50 years. NATO would probably be cracked, if not completely destroyed, if we had a situation where two of its major contributors were fighting each other.
Okay. So Selim, Emmanuel Macron, President of France, talking about the Turkish intervention and then mentioning terms such as territorial conquest. This would have been a form of invasion. It would have been a problem which warranted our response. Just throwing out these terms. Tell me why it's so hard for... Tell me why it's so hard to convince critics that Turkey doesn't have any greater designs beyond just destroying the YPG and going back home.
Mr. Macron should know this better. I wonder what he's doing in Mali and Northwest Africa and surrounding areas. So Sahel region, does that ring a bell?
But that's what they do. I mean, France has a history there, colonial
so
history.
France can do it and Turkey cannot?
But Turkey's saying it's not doing it. That's
Turkey is Turkey is doing it. As far as that's how we got the message. We got the message as Macron warning that it shouldn't be an invasion, and Turkey is saying no, it's not an invasion. It's an anti-terror operation which requires an extensive military involvement. Yes, same thing happened in El Bab. it took quite some time. We forgot the exact time frame, but reaching to Elbap and cleaning up the area, surrounding area also took time. So Afrin might take more time. But back to General's comments, Münbic should not be a Saigon, so it shouldn't be a more struggle between two allies. There's enough damage, more than enough damage already occurred in the relations on the NATO alliance and everything. There's not much to lift up from this point on.
Okay, so
this is serious.
Okay, General Kimmitt, you had a bit of a shake of the head there when he said Saigon. Tell me why.
Well, I don't understand what the comparison is with Saigon. But back to your point, I think both France and Turkey perhaps have a different interpretation. This is not going to be the second Gulf War. I believe Turkey when it says it would be much like the first Gulf War. Go in, destroy the terrorists, and then pull out. So I take President Erdogan at his word. I would think that after they feel sufficient terrorists have been neutralized, that Turkey will then return to its borders and ensure that its borders remain safe. But I don't believe it has any territorial aspirations.
Right. Dima, big picture. HTS shot down a Russian warplane in northwestern Idlib. This is a de-escalation zone, but Hayat Tahrir al-Sham are sort of fair game for these countries to attack. We look at another suspected chlorine attack, regime airstrikes in eastern Ghouta. Yes. So let's fold all of this in. Let's look at Idlib and look at what's happening elsewhere on the ground and look at what's happening in northern Syria now. Is the relative calm that we had in the past year unraveling, and are things ramping up all over the country now?
They are, and I don't know, I'm not sure there was actually, I guess relative is relative. So it's very little, the whole idea of the de-escalation zones hadn't really have really succeeded anywhere. Right. There were a few areas where there was a little bit of calm, but overall, the de-escalation zones did not really see any de-escalation. And as you've seen over the last few days, there's been actually an escalation of violence in the areas you mentioned, Eastern Ghouta and in Idlib, and this comes at the end of the Sochi Congress, which was a complete failure in terms of what Russia wanted from it. It didn't get the political victory it wanted from it to show that it's a true and credible partner in the political process to resolve what's happening in Syria. And now it's along with the regime, they're going back to what they know how to do best, which is using the military force.
General Kimmitt, very finally, is this going to end well for Turkey and the US as friends and both getting what they want out of Syria?
Yeah, I'm optimistic that we will get over this short-term issue between our two countries, because at the end of the day, this isn't going to be solved inside of Syria with military force. We've got to get onto the diplomatic track. I, too, was disappointed in the poor results in Sochi. I think it's important to keep our eye on the ball, which is to get back to diplomacy so that we can have humanitarian relief, we can have reconstruction, and we can focus on the governance of a post-Assad regime.
Okay. Mark Kimmitt, Dima Moussa, and Selim Atalay, it's been good to talk to all of you. Thanks so much for joining us on the Newsmakers.
Thank you.